Hi, folks. We're going to look at this debate, and it's three Christians, three Muslims. We'll just look at a bit today, and we might do more tomorrow or Monday. So let's start.
This does teach there's one God.
Of course,
Yep.
this says the Shema, yeah.
Okay, so then you would also agree that he teaches the Father is God.
Less FaceTime, more face-to-face time, less uncomfortably expensive train tickets, more
Trinity.
Shout out to The Way with Brian DeVilla. That's the channel where this is hosted. So I'll just be mentioning, stopping it and talking a little bit, and we'll carry it on maybe tomorrow. We'll do part 2 and part 1 today, and then part 2 tomorrow, maybe part 3 another day.
So as Muslims, we would be looking at the historical accounts of Jesus, which arguably could be the Synoptics and John. And from that, we would say that nowhere in the Synoptics and John is there anything where Jesus is teaching any kind of triune doctrine that you guys believe in.
So just to be clear, we agree, historic Jesus, we're going to go to the Gospels and to understand who that was.
It's the Jesus quotation. We're not in that.
That's fine. Let's agree that we're going to go to.
Right.
Sound good to you?
That sounds excellent.
That sounds excellent. That's what we were hoping.
Yeah, so
Yeah, specifically if it could be corroborated to him. So there are certain aspects like that we're not going to grant as it pertains to the red letter still, but we'll get to that. Guys, get to those arguments.
All right. So would you agree that this does teach one God?
So the Shema, yeah.
Okay, so then you would also agree that he teaches the Father is God, right? Okay, good. So far fine. Is there a place he teaches that he is God and that the Holy Spirit is God is really what we need to talk about?
No, not necessarily, because you would also have to show that he's saying you're co-equal to the doctrine of the Trinity, right?
Mhm.
You're not subordinationists, you're not Arians, you're not this, you're not that. You guys hold to co-equal, co-eternal. So that will be expected in Scripture, right? Which that's what we're about.
Okay, so let's start with the first thing. Does Jesus teach that he is God?
You can give your argument, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we can rebuttal.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, there are several places.
Right off the bat, what I want to say is don't grant the Muslims neutrality. They're coming across as if they're neutral. To the Bible with any objectivity, and right off the bat, they're saying that where like the sayings of what Jesus says, but we're not going to questions about is this historical. But when they do that, they are using Western historical methods, and those Western historical methods, a lot of those methods can be very arbitrary depending on the philosophical parameters that you're using. In other words, as the Muslims would say they are, and secondly, their historical method is completely different from the Western historical method. So-called, and then they're going to use this Western method, but they're not astute to know how much the Western method is tainted with philosophical bias. So whichever way you go, the Muslims are coming across as if they're objective. They're influenced by the Quran, but they're also don't realize they're using if they're ever going to have any real credibility. But because they're not wise, because they're not wise to this, they're not aware of this.
That he is God. So, for example, in Mark chapter 2, he says that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay, we know from Exodus, Yahweh was the Lord. So, Lord of the Sabbath. It's optical with him claiming a divine title called Lord, Lord, Kitty, Kitty. And as scholars like Robert Bowman Jr. have pointed out, that is a title only attributed to Yahweh in Greek texts from that time or prior. It's throughout the Septuagint, some apocryphal texts. Jesus is that title himself. And then, of course, John, he is God. It's like John 5, where he has the same abilities that God, the Father has, or John 8. Anything you want to add? You two want to add?
Should we break it down? Start.
Yeah, please start. Okay.
Yeah, I think some just general responses. One would be when in Mark 2, when Jesus says that he's Lord over Sabbath, the Son of Man is Lord over Sabbath. We just would say, historically speaking, in the Palestinian first century context, he's referring to the Son of Man just generally refers to humanity. Because then we see in Mark 2, 23 to 27, he starts quoting halachic tradition, like in Mark 2, 27, when he says that that even man is made over, or the Sabbath is made for man, not man made for Sabbath. He's quoting Yoma 85b and other like texts that can be found like how to say.
This guy's wrong. When Jesus uses Son of Man, he's principally referring back to Daniel 7, and Daniel 7. It also talks about one like the Son of Man comes and he is worshipped. Now, that Daniel 7, you have it's Hebrew in some of Daniel's book, but also there is Aramaic. And so in Daniel 7, it's Aramaic. And the word for worship in Aramaic, Daniel only uses it in terms of, it's going back to Daniel chapter 7, and it's in terms of worshiping deity. So when he says the Lord of the Sabbath and the Son of Man, it's referring to him being divine. So all this Dead Sea Scrolls stuff, it doesn't wash, you know. Just saying, folks.
Applied meaning. Next, we see you referenced the double lock, or kyrios in Matthew 7.
Kitties.
Yeah. We just would say it's a double vocative. It's not actually saying it's Adonai Yahweh. You have to assert that Jesus actually elsewhere claims that he's first divine for the interpretation of that to actually be Adonai Yahweh. Otherwise, we would just say that he's just saying Lord, referring to himself as a human Lord twice.
Okay.
Well, words have context. So whenever it's used of Lord, it can mean master or it can mean God. And you've got to look at the context. So when Jesus calms the storm and he's called Lord, well, Yahweh calms the storm. So the context there is clear that he is God. So words mean what they mean in the context. And that's what he's not actually understanding.
Okay, so let's start with the Mark thing. So Mark 2. How does that open? It opens with the story of Jesus healing a paralyzed man. Does he identify himself as the Son of Man in Mark 2?
Yeah, in Mark 2, he can identify himself as the Son of Man in places, but as a general reference to himself or humanity as a whole.
Okay, so where does Jesus ever specifically say Son of Man refers to humanity as a whole?
So I'm aware that the gospel authors use the Son of Man and reinterpret it to explicitly be about Jesus. However, we're arguing from a historical context. And in that historical context, in a first century Palestinian or Aramaic language, as we see multiple scholars like able to connect. So
we have to still go to the Gospels to understand how.
But we're arguing it from a historical aspect, not how the gospel authors have now reinterpreted these sayings.
Well, how do you know that reinterpret
Jesus?
Winter blues are real, which is why working with my BetterHelp therapist is so important for both my mental and emotional support during this time of.
Right. So this so-called historical context. If you want to do the historical context, if you look at text before the time of Jesus, text, there was references to the Son of Man, and there's many texts that imply that the title Son of Man is divine. So if he wants to go down that path, you can go down that path. But again, The Old Testament is the context for why Jesus is speaking. And to say that the gospel writers are reinterpreting it, no, they are saying what our Lord is saying, but our Lord is basing it from the Old Testament. Okay, and any writings outside the Bible are also going to be referred to the Old Testament. And so we can find documentation of intertestamental writings. If you want the evidence for that, you can go to Christian Think Tank, and he has literally countless streams of references to the Son of Man and how it was referred to before the time of Jesus. And some of the references are that the Son of Man is divine. So this chap who's trying to say he's being historical, I'm showing him that actually, if you really want to be historical, you got to get the historical context of first century Judaism and then a more ancient text that he's actually referring to. So if you want specifics on that, I'll get it for you. So yeah, so if you go to, I'll show you this here, just to put some meat on the table for you. So we're not just talking in generalities. But if you go on Christian Think Tank here, Messianic Expectations, first century, you go down on Christian Think Tank, Mr. Miller's site, Messianic Expectations, first century, and there you'll get a complete massive list of the Septuagint translation, Jewish Apocrypha, Dead Sea Scrolls, the Targum, the Septuagint translation, Jewish Apocrypha, Second Esdras, Maccabees, Jewish 1 Enoch. The list goes on and on and on and on. And as you look at all that list, you will find examples where the idea of Son of Man and the idea of the Messiah would be divine, and they're getting this from the interpretation of the Old Testament. And as you can see, there's a whole stack of evidence for you to look at there. So we put a bit of meat on the table there for you. So we're not just talking in generalities.
If we're going to be in reference, if we're going to be looking at that, then we'll be looking at, like, the gospel source material and how.
So how do you know they reinterpret it? Because everywhere when Jesus talks about the Son of Man, he's referring to himself. There's no explicit indication where he refers to the Son of Man as someone distinct from himself. I'll grant you, there are places where it's vague, but there are explicit places where Jesus talks about the Son of Man where it's clearly himself, like in Mark 2.
Right. I don't deny that, and sometimes that the Son of Man can be in reference to himself. However,
Right.
we see that in Mark 2, the most plausible contextual reading would just be that it's in reference to humans, because he then literally starts quoting Jewish midrashic statements talking about how men are made over the Sabbath. So there's no reason for him to think that it's specifically Jesus alone when he already.
I've just explained to him, this chap, that his interpretation is completely wrong. The reason being is the word Son of Man, when Jesus is quoting it, is also principally referring to the Daniel passage. Okay, and an example of that is Jesus, when in his trial, says one like that the Son of Man will come, with his angels. So it's obviously referring back to Daniel 7. So all this midrash and Dead Sea Scrolls and all that, and he's saying he's being historical. You got to be, if you're going to be historical, you also got to be exegetical, and you're not actually looking at the context of the text. But not only that, you're not even understanding that even in the Dead Sea Scrolls and all these, there is a reference back to the Old Testament. And if you go back to the Old Testament, these writings, Dead Sea Scrolls, whatever, they were influenced by Daniel 7. All right. So he's missing that background.
Tells us in Mark 23-27 that it's in reference to all humanity.
So you said in Mark 2, Jesus does identify himself as the Son of Man. Where in the chapter does he show that context switches?
I literally just explained it. Mark 23-27, he explains that the ruling on men being over Sabbath is general.
No, the Son of Man as a reference to that he is a man and that he is standing on behalf of men. No doubt about that. There are references like that. But also there are references to the Son of Man in Daniel, which Jesus refers to. And then you've got to look at the context. So if Jesus is saying he is Lord of the Sabbath and it's about the Son of Man, it's obviously that is about the divine aspect, which goes back to Daniel 7. So what the Muslims are doing is taking one aspect of one meaning of the Son of Man and imposing it in the Mark chapter 2, rather than actually looking at Mark chapter 2 and realizing there is two principal meanings of the Son of Man. One, he is general leader of men, and two, that he is divine. And there's that conflation going on with this guy. He sounds highly intellectual, saying he's historical, but he's not exegetical, and he is not historical.
To all of humanity.
It doesn't say that.
So he just did. I gave the arguments for why that is. I already gave an argument.
Yeah, so it doesn't say that man is over the Sabbath. He just says that the Sabbath was created for man to accommodate them, not that man is over the Sabbath, because man is subject to the Sabbath. They have to obey, they have to follow it. But he does say,
nice one, the Avery God Logic there, picking up on that. That's a good one.
Distinguishing the Son of Man, he says, consequently, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, which, as he pointed out earlier in the context, we see that Jesus explicitly refers to himself as the Son of Man. Where contextually do you get this idea that Jesus is now changing when he refers to the Son of Man? It's not himself.
Yeah, I debated this kid. I debated the guy in the middle. They must have flew him over to America.
Now, but it's everybody.
Yeah. So, like I said, when he's quoting in Mark 27 that even men or I don't know the exact verbatim quote. He's quoting
I'll read it.
Khalid. Yeah, if you
it's right here. It says and Jesus was saying to them, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath.
Right. So
consequently, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.
This quotation can also be found verbatim, found in Jewish midrashic statements and texts that predate Jesus, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. They have the same quotation and the same theology, and the theology entails that men are over Sabbath, as in they can do certain things like picking grain for emergency if they have to eat. And so that's why, and like I said, in the historical context of the first century Palestinian Aramaic speaker, Son of Man, Bari Nosh, can also just mean humanity. So we have no reason to explicitly be taking this as only Jesus.
And that's the problem.
Problem with what he said there, he didn't actually give a quotation. So it's like saying there's cheese on the moon, but he didn't provide the actual evidence. He didn't actually give the quotation. Because if you give the quotation, it would have a different semblance than what he's saying. So notice, where's your source? Quote the source. He's talking in generalities. He's not actually giving a specific source. You need to challenge them and say, give me the quotation. Let them read the quotation and then get the context of the quotation. But we don't get the quotation and we haven't had the context of the quotation. So we might as well have said there's cheese on the moon.
That we're having here, because remember, we talked about the historical Jesus and you guys appealed to the Synoptic Gospels and John. And so when
but we didn't appeal to its authors though. So we were very specific there. We were trying to
the Synoptic Gospels.
No. Yeah, insofar as the red letters, it was insofar as the red letters.
That's my point, sir.
But from a historical aspect, or still look at it from a historical aspect.
The red letters in the Synoptic Gospels, you have Mark 2, where Jesus in context refers to himself as the Son of Man. And
see, I would not have given ground there. There's no way in a million years that I would have given ground. That the Christian guys have given ground. And where have they given ground? They've given ground and said, okay, we'll read the gospel and the synoptics and the red letter. But they've given ground because they're granting Western kind of critical scholarship on the gospel. So critical scholarship will say in the synoptics there's the Q source, right? So once you grant that kind of stuff, you're moving away from the authority of the gospels, because it's important to say, no, Matthew wrote Matthew, John wrote John. That these gospels are based on eyewitness material, and you should have fought that battle, but you've given up that battle. You've granted them these sources from a critical scholarship point of view, and I don't think you should have done that. I think you should have actually let them fight their corner to say that the gospels are not historically reliable, and you should have fought your corner and said, no, Matthew did write Matthew, and here's my evidence. John did write John, here's my evidence. And you should have fought that battle, but instead you've put that battle aside, and I think it was unwise. If you're playing the critical scholarship game, you're now in the critical scholarship realm, and that is can be highly subjective. Like this Muslim guy is highly subjective. He's only picking the bits so-called from the Dead Sea Scrolls that he thinks is relevant, and then he's saying it's objective. So I don't think it was a wise move. I think you should not have granted them that. I think you should have said, no, we're standing on the 4 Gospels. We believe they're historically reliable, and critical scholarship about the Q source. We don't have a Q document, so it's just conjecture. And I would have moved on from there. But instead, you've granted critical scholarship on the Gospels before you even start. And that is a whole minefield. And these Muslim guys, they don't realize how much of that stuff is biased and how much their bias is permeated within that. So when the Muslim's saying he is objective and being historical, it's not correct, because he's only using arbitrary method to arbitrarily suit his point of view. And it's also being influenced by the Quran, but that's another topic.
Continues the conversation. So you said that you have no reason to think or to conclude that Jesus is referring to himself alone as the Son of Man, being Lord over the Sabbath, but you do contextually, that's what he's talking about.
So I want to be very clear here. When we're saying that we're granting the gospel material, we're talking about the Jesus material from a historical aspect. That's why I made it very clear. We're not saying that the disciples actually wrote the gospels, because we're viewing the gospels from a historical standpoint. And if we're viewing it from a historical standpoint, then the argument would show that the Son of Man here is not in reference to Jesus alone, especially because historically speaking, the earliest gospel material never had Son of Man in reference.
Do you agree that the Gospel of Mark identifies Jesus as the Son of Man?
Yeah, we never are arguing anything about what the authors of the text view. I don't even care what the author of Mark views Jesus as, because that's not anything to do with the discussion.
You would agree
up to date.
Do you agree the author of Mark 2 has Jesus?
It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing.
Listen to what he's saying.
Do you agree that Mark 2, in the whole chapter, Jesus explicitly identifies himself in the Son of Man when he's healing the paralyzed man?
I'm saying.
So this idea that, see, that's why I wouldn't have granted them this. I would have fought tooth and nail against so-called critical scholarship here, because they would never use the same kind of methodology. They would never use this so-called critical scholarship on the Quran. They would never ever do that, and yet they're using these methods on the Bible. And you heard him say that it doesn't matter what the author says. Well, it does. It does, because what you're doing is you're saying, wait a minute, Rudolf Bultmann and the form critics, they know the pieces which are historical and which are not. Okay. Well, Rudolf Bultmann said anything in the Gospels that is Jewish is not authentic. And he is the one who really pushed this methodology that the Muslims using. And then scholarship realized, well, wait a minute, no, this is wrong, Bultmann. First century Judaism, we got to realize that there is Jewish material here. It's first century Jewish material. So this methodology, the form critical method that this Muslim's using, is arbitrary. And it's actually an intellectual dinosaur, because you do have a text, you have a book, and that book said the Gospel of Mark had an author. And then there are chapters. And so you to look at the context and how it means within the context. And so what you're doing is you're giving authority to critical scholarship and undermining the authority of God's word and allowing God's word to interpret itself. So hermeneutically, historically, biblically, philosophically, you should have defended the authorial intent of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I would not have granted that and thrown it under a bus like these three Christians have. Would never have done that. Very, very unwise. And it's going to mean you're going to get entangled and you're going to get sidestepped because they're going to come across as if they're historical, but they're not actually historical.
And topic.
Literally.
It's
No,
not
that's
the-
very relevant.
No, it's not,
Because
because the whole
contextual.
point is that we're talking about the historic Jesus, not the interpretation of the historic Jesus as it pertains to Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John.
How do you know who the historical Jesus is?
Just before we continue, you already agreed that fine, we'll go with the right letters.
That's what y'all.
Right.
But we're quoting.
He's asking, quick. You said we'll go to that, and then he clarified there's going to be in reference to the historical things that can be predated back to Christ, right? So when you reference back the synoptics in general, and you say, "Hey, what do we need to know about Christ?" He's sort of like pedaling back onto that standard.
No,
essentially.
I'm going on what Jesus explicitly said about himself, which you agree. If you don't think he actually identified himself as the Son of Man, why are you appealing to Mark where Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man in there?
We don't appeal to the verse. You guys put the verse.
But the verse.
I'm okay. So I'm lost. So
So wait a minute. They're saying that the Bible, the Gospels are not historically reliable, and they're using the historical method, but they're having to back up the position by quoting the Gospel of Mark. So there's a contradiction there. So that's a good point that Inspiring Philosophy brought up.
we go back to the back to the question.
Yeah.
Where do we get the historical Jesus from?
You don't know what an AI work management platform is? Okay, let me tell you. Here's 3 new AI-powered changes to the Monday platform.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we can get relevant data from the Bible over the historical Jesus, but there's also other gospel material that's going to happen as well. Like I know IP is familiar with the Current Gospel of Thomas, also having Q quotes and the consensus of scholarship in
It's 2nd century at best.
Well, the consensus of scholarship holds that it has pre-synoptic independent material from the synoptics, so it's not dependent on the synoptics. So even if we said that the Gospel of Thomas, every part of it was made in the 2nd century, boo-hoo, because it's still independent of the synoptics.
This is irrelevant to the main
So that has absolutely
based on
hold on. He's asking us, where do we get our historical information of Jesus?
Yes.
I just told you the Gospel of Thomas has historical information of Jesus, and it's independent of the Gospels.
So gospel.
Right. When he says consensus of scholarship, what consensus? I mean, he's not giving any specific scholars there, if you notice. You read the Gospel of Thomas, it's not historically reliable. And the reason why it's not historically reliable is A, it's quoting from the Gospels. So it's quoting from them. Secondly, it's theologically schizophrenic. It says that Jesus was a woman. And thirdly, it doesn't know anything about, there's nothing within that gospel that gives you any sense of that writer knows anything about the time of Jesus, the culture of Jesus. So it is a 2nd century source. And to say that there is an independent source, A, you've got to quote the source, and B, you've got to give multiple attestation for the independence of that source and give a criteria for the source. So you've not done that. All you've done is made assertions. You've used a 2nd century source that is not based on eyewitness. You see, this is why you should fight the battle that the Gospels are based on eyewitness. John's based on eyewitness. Matthew's based on eyewitness. Luke uses eyewitness. Mark uses Peter. Because the Gospel of Thomas is not eyewitness. It's 2nd century. And its theology is all over the place. And it's quoting from the 4 Gospels anyway. So there we are,
gospel.
Jesus?
I don't even need to go to the 4 canonical gospels to look at it.
Is Gospel of Thomas correct?
But that's the thing. It's not is a thing reliable.
No, yeah, exactly. Where we're
I'm not saying it's just reliable, isn't. Right?
So
It's qualified.
It is. It's the Gospel of Thomas where we can get our true.
It has relevant historical.
I got you.
So that it gets. Does it have super?
I don't know why you keep going with this.
Let me tell you.
I'm not getting a clear answer.
You see, that's why Avery now is saying, wait a minute, is the Gospel of Thomas a reliable source? You should have fought that battle straight away. Straight away, you should have fought that battle. You should have fought the battle that the 4 Gospels are reliable. And you should have come down on critical scholarship, on the Rudolf Bultmann form criticism, and critique that, because that's what these guys are using. And you should have done that. You should have done that groundwork first, because if he's gone to the Gospel of Thomas, and that brings up the issue, is that reliable? Why not have preempted that strike right at the beginning and talk about the 4 Gospels are historically reliable and fight that battle? But you didn't fight that battle. You gave it up. Then you allowed them to use critical scholarship, i.e. form criticism. And now you've got the battle is now on the Gospel of Thomas. And now you want to ask the question, is it reliable? And that's going to get into the issue of the historical reliability of these Gospels. That should have been done right at the beginning. That's my point. And the Muslims are trying to get away from this issue of historical reliability and just talk about we're doing history. We're doing what the scholars do, which is the form critics. And so they want to throw under the bus any issue of so-called reliability, whether it be of the Gnostics or whether it be the Gospels, so they can try and play this neutral game. But it's not neutral, because there are questions about the Gospel of Thomas. Is it historically reliable? And it isn't. And the 4 Gospels are. And so that battle should have been fought, but it wasn't. So there we are. Hiya, brother. God bless you on Gaz.
Ask if it's true. I got you.
Yeah. So
Hold on, guys. Did you know that over 80% of people that watch these videos are not subscribed? And that's the best way to support this channel. So let's give the audience a second to subscribe. And if they want,
Being a hypothetical document that we can't just actually obtain and get a holistic view of it, that you would still be appealing that Matthew uses source material outside of Mark that's as old as Mark.
I'm fine. Let's just move it. So
We're appealing to the historical source materials that the gospel authors are using.
if we go through Mark and we go, okay, well, Jesus clearly claims to be son.
The historical source materials that the Gospel are using, there is no, the Q source, we don't have a document of the Q source. It's just conjecture. It's just conjecture. It's a theory. Some say Mark came first. Some say it's the Q source. Some say it's Matthew. It's just a theory. Okay? It's just a theory. There's no document of the Q source. Never been found. So it's just form criticism. And what it does, it undermines the 4 Gospels.
Man, how do we know he actually said that? What is the actual foundation, the authority we can use to determine who the historical Jesus was, so we can know what he taught?
Yeah, if you're asking specifically from our perspective and not just the argument at hand, because the argument at hand isn't from our actual perspective, we were just giving an argument. But from our actual perspective, you're asking us what is the historical Jesus material we would get. It's that the source material that the gospel authors use, the synoptics, which we can get based upon the fact that we know that they're anonymous, independent works, and they independently both use the same source material. They use Mark as a medial, and they have a secondary source material that they have a literary dependence on, which we know based upon their literary details, the way that they're quoting.
I got
you. So
thank you.
I'm noting up what he's saying is correct. But to render it down to the simplest point is going to be the historical critical method, aka that which can be corroborated, early attested to, right? That which has we can apply the criteria of the similarity, which IP should be familiar with.
Mhm.
If all these criteria can be implemented upon a text, right, then we can determine that text to be reliable.
Okay.
Right.
So what is the source that we can go to to get the accurate historical information about Jesus so we can know what he said and actually start this conversation.
Is your question more of like one specific book that we're all going?
Well, no, because we use four.
You're
I mean, we use Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You got her saying no, and
They're using Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
No, I
Where
understand.
are you guys using?
Yeah, we're using the relevant historical data.
Which
as we have
ones?
yeah, literally any source that could be
Name one.
corroborated as it pertains to.
Just
yeah,
name one.
he
So
said
let me explain it.
Q. So you guys are working off a Q.
Most people using ChatGPT and Claude are leaving 80% of the value on the table. Here's how the top 1% of the users actually prompt. First,
Okay.
The whole point is-
Right. So the Muslims are using the Q source, right? The Q source, there's no document ever found. So there's no actual document of the so-called Q source. Nobody's ever found a document. It's just conjecture of scholars, and every scholar has got a different idea what the Q source is. So there's no 100%. All the scholars say there is this Q source. There is a variety of scholars who say this is the Q source and that's the Q source, and there's different so-called Q sources, but nobody's ever found a manuscript of the Q source. So it's just conjecture. And then this Q source is developed by not just the historical critical method. It's developed by theories like form criticism, which says that the Gospels were late, came in the 2nd century, and were edited by the community. So when you go into the Q source, you already have a bias. You're saying that, wait a minute, these Gospels came in the 2nd century and they were edited over time. So I wouldn't grant you your Q source, because I wouldn't grant you that the Gospels have been edited over 150 years. I would say that the Gospels were written by the authors, and I would defend that. One of the Muslims said that the Gospels are anonymous. Well, how come that every manuscript that we have of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John has the titles on? You will never find a Gospel of John with the title, the Gospel of Thomas, on it. All Gospels of John have the word gospel, have John on it. You will never find a Gospel of Luke with a title, say, the Gospel of Barnabas. You will always find when it's the Gospel of Luke, Luke's name is on it. And the same with Matthew. You will find that the name of Matthew is always there. You won't find another name like Hippolytus or some name. In other words, if they're anonymous, there would be an inconsistency in the actual name. The names would be changing all the time. No, the names are always stable, always consistent in the manuscript tradition. But it gets worse for the Muslim, because these manuscripts that were copied in France and Germany and Egypt and all over the ancient world, they're all the same in the names. So if the Gospel of Matthew is copied in Egypt, it's named Matthew. And if it's copied in France, it's named Matthew. And so there is this consistency, not only in the regularity of the names, but in the distribution of the names throughout the ancient world. They're always consistent, proving that they're not anonymous. There was always this consistency. Okay? And secondly, the internal character of the gospel. So, for example, if you read Matthew was a tax collector. You get a feel of the issue of money in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew was all able to, as a tax collector, he was able to make notes and write. So it's not improbable that as Matthew, he would have made notes of what Jesus did, and that he was capable of writing the Gospel of Matthew. And also, one of these Gospels, just the Gospel of Matthew itself, to produce in his time of Matthew would have cost him £2,000. That's what it would have cost to write the Gospel of Matthew. And so you're saying they're going to write a gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, that costs £2,000, and they're going to distribute it among people, and it's going to be anonymous? I don't think so. Yeah, that's a good point, guys. Yeah, it's gone to textual criticism.
That
Yeah.
there's relevant
by the way,
data.
we can go on to Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, no issue, but it's not going to be unqualified.
Okay, so
right?
we can get Q is where we get the hypothetical Q teachings of Jesus. Can we do that? Can we start there?
No, but real quick before we move on to that, and I have no issue in addressing Mark 2. There's no issue with that, right? We can address that.
What?
But, specifically regarding Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, they can contain historical information, right? And you would agree, for example, I don't know if you would, but there would be some aspect of John, for example, that wouldn't be reliable, right? Right? That is
I
the
wouldn't
case.
agree with that. That's it.
Okay, that's fine, but
That's reliable gospel.
that's what the scholarship says, right? But the point is, we can go ahead and address Mark 2. No issue with that, right? So okay, that's fine, but
That's reliable gospel.
that's
Source that we can go to get the accurate historical information about Jesus so we can know what he said and actually start this conversation.
Is your question more of like one specific book that we're all going
Well,
through?
no, because we use 4. I mean, we use Matthew,
Yeah,
Mark,
yeah,
Luke,
yeah.
John. You
The point
guys
is that
are
we're
saying
not-
no, and
They're using Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
No, I
Right? Where
understand.
are you guys using?
Yeah, where we're using the relevant historical data.
Which
as we have
ones?
the Yeah, literally any source that could be
Name one.
corroborated as it pertains to
Just name one.
let me explain
Q.
it. Right.
So you guys are working off a Q.
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole point
So-
is that
so-
there's
And
relevant
by the way,
data.
we can go on to Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, no issue, but it's not going to be unqualified.
Okay, so we can get Q is where we get the hypothetical Q teachings of Jesus. Can we do that? Can we start there?
No, but real quick before we move on to that, and I have no issue in addressing Mark 2. There's no issue with that, right? We can address that.
What?
But, specifically regarding Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, they can contain historical information, right? And you would agree, for example, I don't know if you would, but there would be some aspect of John, for example, that wouldn't be reliable, right? Right? That is
I
the
wouldn't
case.
agree with that. That's it.
Okay, that's fine, but
That's reliable gospel.
that's what the scholarship says, right? But the point is, we can go ahead.
I'll just show you. Here. You get this book for free, and it's the historical reliability of the Gospels. And if you go onto the book here, it will give you the historical reliability for the Gospel of John. And Blomberg says that there are over 50 historical facts in the Gospel of John. So scholarship has often said John is not historically reliable. That's what they've said, right? But actually, that is just biased because there are historical facts within the Gospel of John. So, yeah, it's prejudistic. Prejudistic, man.
Just Mark 2. No issue with that, right? So someone bearing the name Yahweh, right? Does that make them Yahweh?
Yeah, it means that they are.
Yes. Okay, so
No one has the name Yahweh except Yahweh alone. That's not Nehemiah 9:6.
okay, so when it comes to Exodus, when it comes to other prophets, when it says that Yahweh will do something, and then prophets do that thing,
Yeah.
right? Does that make them
Agency.
Yahweh?
That's agency.
Okay, so what is the distinction in Christ being an agent of God?
Because very good. Because Christ isn't just an agent of the Father, but he claims himself to be Yahweh himself.
That's a very clean question.
Let me finish.
Right.
I know, but you asked me, all right?
There you go.
So we can discuss that. But I'm giving you the difference between an agent and Jesus, right? So an agent cannot claim to be Yahweh himself, cannot claim the prerogatives of Yahweh, but Jesus does. That's the symmetry breaker. So you'll never see, like, for example,
Just a little shout out. It's important to note that since the Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant, the ancient world used to believe that God had an ontology. Ontology means being. So the ancient world, they believed that God or the gods had ontology, i.e. a being. But when you had the Enlightenment with Immanuel Kant, scholarship changed and said, we can't know anything about God as being. We can only look at action. So come 200 years later to say the University of Harvard, scholars looking at the New Testament will say, Jesus can't be God because there's no such thing as ontology. We don't look at ontology. We don't look at being. There is no being of God, so Jesus can't be God. We will look at actions. So then they talk about divine agency, and they can't get in their mind the idea that Jesus could be God because there's no such thing as ontology, being, that God is a being. So what I'm saying is when these Muslims are talking about divine agency, They're coming through a stream of 200 years of Enlightenment philosophy. Enlightenment philosophy that's influenced this kind of idea, because there are examples where Jesus clearly states that he is God, which is Matthew chapter 8, verse 58, where Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Okay. Yeah, okay. So continue.
Aaron, when the example where Aaron takes the staff and when Yahweh says, I'll do it, Aaron does it. You'll never see Aaron say, I'm Yahweh, or claim to be Yahweh, or whatever. Jesus does.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're familiar with it clearly. Obviously, they know that whenever the verse is being quoted, it says that Yahweh is literally the one who's holding the rod in his hand, but obviously it's Aaron the one who's holding the rod in his hand. So we would just say that's divine agency. Yeah. But back to what T-May was saying, you would have to obviously show first that Jesus actually does claim any kind of divinity for them to be a differential.
Of course. So you do agree that is a symmetry breaker, though, right?
No, because for example, we like when you say divine prerogatives, you mean divine properties?
Yes, of God. So like being all powerful, all knowing, judge of heaven and earth.
So
resurrecting the dead, first and last.
So when it comes to knowing all things, would you agree that's a divine prerogative, right?
Yes. And so that's what I'm asking. Like if Jesus is claiming to have the divine attributes or prerogatives of God, like the things only God does, the claims that only God can make, would you agree that would be a symmetry breaker between an agent of Yahweh and Yahweh?
No, because we see other instances where others other than Yahweh, other than Jesus, right, would quote unquote be predicated with these prerogatives. For example, 1 John 2:20 said that the disciples know all things.
No,
it says that.
No, that's qualified.
Okay, let's bring it up.
It's qualified. Yeah. So what we're trying to say is that if Jesus claims to be Yahweh, okay, that could only mean he's either lying, ignorant, or he is actually Yahweh.
So or there's a fourth option. That can I give you in Jewish monotheism in the first century, the legal status, the status of a sender is the same as an agent.
But the sender, the agent, the can never claim to be the king, as he knows. He never claimed to be Yahweh.
He has the same exact status of it. For example, I'm quoting you actual reference. This is found in like Nedarim 72b. These are midrash.
I don't care about that.
The thing is, I'm saying there's a fourth option you could say from Jewish monotheism that's agency still, because Jewish monotheism allows this, which I would, if I can just finish, please. And we can find this example in 1 Samuel 25 when David wants to go marry Abigail, and so he sends his servants, and then the servants go to Abigail, and Abigail prostrates and speaks in the singular in the Hebrew, as if you're speaking to David, but you're speaking to the servants, because the servants have been sent by David, so they have the exact same status as David, while not actually being him.
Do the servants claim to be David?
It doesn't.
Hold up. Do the servants claim to be David?
They are called David.
Please. Do the servants claim?
Not in this instant, but it was
exactly. If they did, what would happen to them?
Nothing.
Why are we skipping over this?
If the servants claimed,
go ahead.
If the servants claim to be the king, you said nothing would happen to them?
No.
That's called what was it called? Treason. There you go. Yeah. That's treason, dude. You can't. A servant cannot claim to be a king. He'll be put to death.
Yeah, only in the sense of his status.
Let me listen. So we see you're bringing up examples where people represent the king, but they are not the king themselves.
It's interesting when Avery or Inspiring Philosophy counter. The Muslim people don't actually deal with that. You say, oh, you don't understand, or they come up with some kind of excuse, but they don't actually deal. Like Avery gave a good point saying, look, when you say divine agency and someone comes in the name of David, do they actually say they are David? And the Muslims skip around that. They don't want to actually deal with that. And so there's a kind of pick and mix. They'll only deal with things they want to deal with. They don't actually deal with some of the challenges that Avery and Inspiring Philosophy actually bring to the table there.
They cannot claim to be the king themselves. So we're not when it comes to Jesus is not claiming to just be a servant of the Father. He claims to be God. He claims to have the divine prerogatives that only God has, the titles that only God has, actions that only God has. So would you agree that this is a simple.
Yeah, brother, Glory Yahweh 777. You've said enough now, mate. You're spoiling the stream. You're spoiling the stream now. You've said enough. You shared the gospel. So please, that's it now, yeah? I've let you share the gospel, so that's it. Okay? Thanks, brother. Thanks for that, yeah.
Symmetry breaker between a mere agent. So an agent can claim to be God.
Yeah, and I'm giving an example that he gave in 1 Samuel, right? Where she calls the people, the servants. He says, "My servant." So she identifies.
No, I don't find the arguments of the Muslims impressive at all. I find they're just trying to. All they've done is they've read a few Western books on historical Jesus studies, and they've found a few scholars that they think they can use. And so I'm not impressed by that, because I've been reading historical Jesus stuff for years, so I'm not impressed by what they're saying at all. I think Avery and Inspiring Philosophy are doing okay. They are pushing back. I think they made a big mistake in not dealing with the historical reliability of the Gospels and the authorship of the Gospels. They shouldn't have just allowed so-called critical scholarship, i.e. form criticism and things like that, to be brought into the table and into the mix. They should have dealt with that and demolished it straight away, because that's where these Muslims are coming from. That's what I would have done.
Them as David. She says that they're David, although David isn't actually present. Okay, so that's number one.
Can you bring up the reference?
Yeah, which was 1 Samuel 25, 39 and 41.
Let's read that. And what's your point on this?
And then the point is that she calls them David, although David isn't present. So they bear the name David. They identified as David, although David isn't there.
Yeah, can you? Okay, so there's two different things here. Number one.
Can I read it?
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
Okay, so then David sent word to Abigail.
Sorry. Quick, let me go along with you.
Yeah.
Hey, quick break from the conversation. I want to give a big shout out to Logos. So Logos is an app that helps people study the Bible
with her face to the.
Synthesia is the next great tool for training employees, and here is how it works in 3 simple steps. Simply
the ground and said, "Behold, your maidservant is a servant woman to wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Then Abigail hurried and arose, and she rode on a donkey with her 5 young women who went about with her, and she went after the messengers of David and became his wife.
Are they learning this from Christian critical scholarship or non-Christian critical scholarship? Both. The Christian critical scholarship is rooted in the non-Christian critical scholarship, so they're getting it from both. But people like Rudolf Bultmann form criticism and things like that, so that's where they're coming from. And there's a lot of assumptions in these so-called critical scholarship. It's not as objective like form criticism, which these guys are kind of using, these Muslims are using. Like Rudolf Bultmann and these scholars said that the Gospels are late development, and so we've got to, like, 2nd century, and we've got to get back to the original sources and things like that. So that's where they're coming from, and I wouldn't have granted that. I would have dealt with that straight away. I would have said, well, when you talk about critical scholarship, what tools are you saying, and where did you get these tools from, and which scholars are you being influenced by? And then I would have destroyed the foundation before we even get to the actual debate. That's not what I would have done. I wouldn't have granted them straight away like these 3 Christian guys did.
Where does it say that she called them David?
She said she bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant." So they addressed the people as a singular servant, which is David.
Well, no, where does it say? No, see, this is why we got to read, bro. You.
So it doesn't say David, so they've been caught out. Fair play to Avery there. He's caught him out.
You said that she called them David.
No, I said, who's a servant in this case?
The servants are the messengers that David sent, and she's right. Their servant.
Wait, servant with a singular? Who's the servant?
Look, it says this.
What it represents?
Look, this is what it says. She says, it says, David sent us, yada, yada, yada. let's go to what she said.
She
Behold,
bowed down.
she says, behold, your maid servant. Servant is singular. She's
Right.
the servant.
Yeah, to who?
To the servants of David.
But you is a singular. It's not a plural.
So the you
So the you is in reference to only David.
No, it's not. Let me go ahead and respond to this, because in Exodus 20, when it says you shall have no other gods before you, that you is in the singular, but it's referring to the nation of Israel, correct?
Yeah, that's just because Israel can be referred to as a one. Yeah.
So you can have the servants be referred to as one, even though it's referring to a plurality of persons.
But
So
the thing is, you see a
David.
difference. You see, because
What's the difference?
after the thing is, when they're speaking on the behalf of David, Abigail refers to them as one, but then
Right.
after that, then refers to them as plural servants. So while accepting they're multiple people, whenever they're speaking on the behalf of David, she only calls them one person.
Okay.
Now, whenever she's speaking or when she's performing, yes, that's why the use is why the use is singular in the Hebrew.
I just gave you so then
But then all of a sudden, then it goes to plural once they're not acting on the behalf of David.
and we're going to use this argument, then you're going to have to say, then when Yahweh told Israel, you should have no other gods before me, that you there in the Hebrew is in the masculine singular. So
Yeah, this is qualifying.
but it's addressing
right,
that's my point. So is Exodus 20. Is that the you is singular when God is talking to the nation that has a plurality of individuals. So just because the you would be singular, and we have to check this, but even if the you is in the singular form,
Wait, the servant, the word for servants?
the word for
Okay.
So even if the you is in the singular there, it can refer to a community or a corporate entity. So the servants on David's behalf will be a corporate entity. She can use the you there singularly. That nowhere here does it say that she's calling.
It's not about the you. It's the fact that it's it's about that, and it's a servant.
Look, brother.
All this argument is about the divine agency. That there's this person speaking on behalf of David, what is seen as David. That's the argument. So even if you grant that, that's questionable. Avery's questioning it. But let's say you grant that. That doesn't get you where you want to go. The reason why it doesn't get you where you want to go. Number one, you said you wanted to be historical. So why are you going to the Old Testament now? Oh, we're historical. Where are you in the historical critical method? Okay. Well, so why are you going to the Old Testament? Why are you talking about David's servant? Where's your historical critical method there? Right? You got to interpret text. And when you interpret text, you've got to interpret context. You've got to deal with the context. Okay? So we've got to deal with the text of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So what I would do, I would push back against these Muslims by doing two things. I would say, look, there are Old Testament references to the Messiah becoming, that the Messiah would come and be God. And I'd say to them, the Quran actually says that Jesus is a Messiah, mentions him 3 times, but how do we know he's the Messiah? And then I'd say we have to go back to the Old Testament. The Old Testament says the Messiah is going to be in Isaiah 9, Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Prince of Peace. And then I would bring them back to the Gospels, and I'd say, look, Jesus in John 8 says, before Abraham was, I am. What's the Aramaic for the word I am? Means I am God. But then I wouldn't just stop there. I would say, wait a minute, we have even earlier sources than the Gospels, which is Paul's letters, which are written in the first letters are written early in the 50s, 50 AD. And we have references where in 1 Corinthians, at the end of 1 Corinthians, it says Maranatha. Paul says Maranatha, which means Lord, come Lord, calling Jesus Lord. And that Maranatha word goes back within a year or two of the community of Jesus, showing you that this is even earlier than the Q source. So I would deal with it that way myself. But I would get away from this David stuff. It's getting you bogged down, and I would get out of it as quick as you can and move on to something else.
It's a servant, bro.
But hold on. Yeah.
Singular
She's the servant. It says, behold, your maid servant. Your maid servant is.
I am your servant.
Yes.
Which is
her. She is.
Who's your servant to?
To the servants of David.
And it represents David, right?
So they're
right. They represent David.
They represent David. So notice. So can we agree here that she does not refer to the servants as David?
It does. You said he is.
She no, I didn't.
Look, you said yes.
I'll explain it.
She just said yes. It went to David.
No,
when the servants are speaking.
So notice we're in a hermeneutical bind here. That's why it's important to demolish critical scholarship method right at the beginning and come back to a more biblical epistemology or a biblical theory of knowledge, so that you are using a biblical method of hermeneutics and a biblical method of historical inquiry. And so like when they're talking about this David passage, they should be looking at, well, what's the context of the chapter, and like looking at what commentators have said about it, like John Gill and others. That should be brought in, and that would just silence any debate or discussion about David here. But this is all smoke and mirrors. Even if you could even grant what they're saying is correct, which it isn't, but then move on to texts that clearly show Jesus is God.
On the behalf of David, she refers to them as a singular because she's referring to David, because in Jewish monotheism, which we have first century Jewish attestation, the legal status of a sender is this, or of the sender is the same as an agent. So the reason why it's in the reference. Huh?
This is like
Yeah, but I'm saying we have first century Jewish attestation. So I'm saying in comparison with the historical argument on how we would compare this with Jesus, we would look at it from a first century Jewish lens, that Jesus is just an agent because he has the same legal authority as Yahweh while not actually being Yahweh.
Can we get back to that main point though? Does
that is the
servants claim to be the king or David?
With AI,
you can create any character that you want to in seconds.
This used to require huge hauls.
No, they don't. But they don't need
this
to.
Is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Oh my, no, they don't need to.
Because here's the symmetry breaker. The symmetry breaker is Jesus does. And so let me ask you this.
But now what you're doing is you're just
hold on. If an agent claimed to be, like, let's say for these servants, if they claimed to be the king, would they be wrong?
Yeah, they would not be wrong, because the same way where Moses claims to be Elohim doesn't mean he's literally Elohim.
Where does Moses claim to be Elohim?
Or when he's made Elohim to
Does
Pharaoh.
Moses claim that?
He's not the author of Exodus?
Brother, is Moses the one saying I am Elohim?
Or who's speaking of Exodus? Who's speaking?
Who's he quoting?
Who's he speaking?
Who's he quoting?
Who is he? Why else is this question?
No, I'm the one who asked the question.
No,
I know, because you asked the question with a question. Don't tell me that.
I've been asking the question.
Okay, so I asked, did Moses claim to be Elohim? Did he claim that himself? And the answer is
right. He's the author of the Pentateuch.
And who's he quoting in the Pentateuch?
Sure, he's quoting God. Wow.
So he himself is not claiming to be Elohim. He's saying this is what God said.
Well, that is a fantastic point. I mean, that is a. You can see the guy in the middle knows they've got caught there.
Use those kind of arguments, it's going to be the exact same sense with any time Jesus is speaking. It's actually a revelation from God that he's only speaking because God told him to so, because he has no will of God.
No, that's bad.
So if you're trying to use that kind of argument,
Aaron, this is bad because I'm not talking. No, this is what I'm saying. Okay, because you have
the Muslims are on the ropes now, proper style.
Have where Moses talks, and you have where Moses quotes Yahweh, right?
Right.
Yes. Moses speaks in Exodus.
You have Jesus where Jesus speaks. You have Jesus where he quotes the Father. And we actually see when the Father speaks back to the Son, right? So we know when the person is speaking, context will tell us, yada, yada, yada. My point is that never, ever do you see an agent of Yahweh claim to be Yahweh. You'll never see that. So with Jesus, he's not just merely an agent, which is why this conversation we're having, he's not just an agent. He claims to be Yahweh. He claims to be God. And that's where we need to get to.
So, and we would just be saying that that's okay because as an agent, he has the same status as the sender, and his sender is Yahweh. But he makes it very clear throughout the Gospels that he doesn't do anything on his own accord. He has things given to him. He seeks someone else's will. These are all things that you would suspect and expect.
So that's the Muslim interpretation. That's coming from the Quran now. That's not coming from the historical information. Look at the guy in the middle. He knows that what they're saying is just not cutting it.
In Jewish agency, but you wouldn't.
That's what we would expect a Trinitarian to be.
Right. So that's it, bros and sisters. They just fell into their own trap of actually they're not doing history. They're just looking at it from their own bias. They would expect Unitarian theology. Brilliant. That's the end of the debate there.
Exactly, because we're arguing historicity, and we're making an.
Oh, it's going back to his historicity now, because they got to pull back to that, but they just give the game away.
Oh, the point from a historical standpoint, first century Jewish monotheism is completely compatible with these texts.
I disagree. Because according to first century Judaism, first of all, when you even talk to, they don't even know who the angel of the Lord is. Depending on which Jews you're asking about, the angel of the Lord is a problem. He's a problem because the angel of the Lord doesn't claim to be an agent of Yahweh. He claims to be Yahweh himself. He says, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
He says, I'm the one who makes the covenant with you. He says to Abraham, you did not withhold your son from me. Right. So Yahweh continues, the angel of the Lord continues to claim to be Yahweh, while with agents, you'll see Gabriel says, this is what Yahweh said. I'm a messenger from Yahweh.
So notice how the debate is talking about text. So this is the disingenuous with the Muslims. They're saying, oh, we want to do historical. But you've got to deal with the text. You've got to deal with the Old and New Testament text. And Avery is bringing up the angel of the Lord coming from Judges, the book of Judges, coming from Exodus, where he meets Abraham and Sodom and Gomorrah and stuff like that. And so you got to deal with the text and then interpret the text. And they're making a good point that it's not just an agency where the person is doing something on behalf of God. The angel is claiming to be God, and there's a big difference there. And this is not what the Muslims are really willing to get into, really.
You'll see Moses and Aaron and all the other prophets. Thus says Yahweh. You don't see that with the angel of the Lord.
Beautiful. Okay, so I want to pick you up that because you said both the title and the divine prerogatives. You said that 1 John 2:20 was qualified. Where is that qualified exactly? Because it says
Let's go to it.
It says, and have you an anointing from the Holy One and know all things.
You said 1 John what?
2:20.
Yeah, 2.
We do full fiber broadband, so you can do life. Hyper optic, full fiber that's in your corner.
Okay, I've got to go in a minute, guys.
I have to tell. You're built like a pro. My husband says chest is the hardest muscle to build. What's your superset?
I don't have one. No gym.
No gym? How?
I'm 44. I don't waste time there. I do military calisthenics. 15.
Okay.
We'll do this last one and then we'll call it a day because I've done 6 hours of lecturing. So I'm tired. But I think right at the beginning, don't give any ground to the Muslims. I'm not into Jay Dyer. I don't agree with a lot of his theology, but Jay Dyer, if he was debating, he wouldn't have let the Muslims get off the ground. You got to attack their foundation straight away before anything. And that was not done. And that allowed them some traction. But I wouldn't have allowed them some traction. I would have nailed them straight away before we even get into the text. So there we are. So we'll listen to this one and then we'll call it a day.
All right, watch this. Verse 18. Children, it is the last hour, and just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour. So what is the knowledge of? The signs of the last hour.
Again,
so let me
finish up.
They went out from us, but they were not really of us. For if they were of us, they would have remained with us, but they went out so that it would be manifested that they all are not of us. But you have an anointing from the Holy One, and you all know. Well, in your version, it says you know all things, right? So what is the qualification? Because even if I'm going with your rendition of the verse, the qualification is the knowledge of the signs of the last hour and the Antichrist and the false believers.
Okay,
It's qualified.
I understand that it mentions that prior. Okay, but just because it mentions the prior doesn't mean that it must now disqualify the entire. So you would say that disciples now know all things in a sense? Can you say that?
Sure. In the context of them knowing all things regarding the last hour, regarding the last hour, the signs of the hour, the Antichrist, the disbelievers that's going out from them. That's in the sense in which they know all.
When it quotes Christ knowing all things, for example, in John 16, and it's a context of revelation about what's to come, and the Holy Spirit, would you say that this means that now Christ doesn't actually know everything, and it doesn't mean that?
Can you show me where it qualifies it?
Yeah, in John 16, let me pull up the verse, 16:14, I believe. It says, all that belongs to the Father's mind. That is why I said the Spirit will receive from me what he will make known to you.
You hear that? All that the Father has.
Just real quick, and it says, and it says that which I received, that will be the Holy Spirit will now tell you. And what is the Holy Spirit teaching them?
So notice, the Holy Spirit gives them revelation, gives them guidance.
Beautiful,
right?
Beautiful.
So watch what
it's qualified.
Well, this is what this is what we're saying here.
Right.
With Jesus, he says all things that the Father has mine.
Does the Son beget?
That would huh?
Does the Son beget?
No, focus.
That's not what we're talking about.
You're saying
he's the begotten.
His point is that if it's unrestricted all, okay, if it's an unrestricted all, then it's the case that you're saying everything that the Father possesses, the Son also possesses. Is that the case?
Yeah, everything that the Father let me go ahead and answer you in full. Everything that the Father has but they belong to Jesus. What is this talking about? This is talking about this is talking about everything, right? In regards to creation, in regards to sustaining the universe. This is everything that the Father has is his. This
Where
is
are you getting that qualification though? Because now you're saying hold on. No, because the verse is
right. So have you noticed the Muslims now are forced? They're saying they're doing history, but they're forced to actually study text and look at context, and so they're struggling now because the Christian people know their text better, so they're able to explain it better, So anyhow, we're going to finish there. Would you believe I debated this middle guy only a few weeks ago, and I must say I did quite well against the guy. So, all right, we're going to call it a day. I think we've done enough. We're on 31 minutes. Shout out to The Way with Brian. So I'll just show that channel so people can see. Go to his channel. That's the channel there, The Way with Brian Davila, etc. So go to the channel there. Shout out to him for this video. Yeah. Thanks, bro. So I'm going to go. God bless you, everyone. Take care. I hope you enjoyed the show. And God bless you. But I think it's an interesting debate. But I think it could have been more profitable if the foundation was dealt with more. That woman is famous on TikTok. Okay. But I think it would have been more edifying if more verses would have come out and the Christians would have been brought more evidence and not give the Muslims too much leeway. I think it would have been better, and not allow them to bring in so-called critical scholarship, but to deal with that straight away. Yeah, thanks, brother. You're right. Yeah. All right, gonna go. God bless you and take care. And God bless you. Have a look at Christian Think Tank. I'll just get that again. Oh, I'll tell you what. Before we go, get a hold of this book. You can get it for free. It's on Google Archive. The Historical Reliability of the Gospels, Craig L. Blomberg. So yeah, get a hold of that and have a read of that. You'll find that interesting. And then, but really, what else you'll find interesting is it's a Christian Think Tank by Mr. Miller. It's an extremely brilliant website. It's got loads of really good stuff there for you. If you go to the right-hand side, there's a lot of stuff on Islam and really, really good material there. So that's Christian Miller. And sorry, that's Mr. Miller. I think that's his name. Glenn M. Miller. His name is Glenn M. Miller. and it's a Christian think tank, and you get loads and loads of really, really top articles there. Very, very scholarly. Really good for dealing with atheists and Muslims. Brilliant site. Very, very top site there. That's Christian think tank, Mr. Glenn Miller. Very good website. Okay, I'm going to go. Take care, everyone. Love to everybody out there. Thank you, Gaz. Thank you, everybody, for coming. 9. I hope you found it a blessing. And take care now. Bye.